The engines roared as Flight 101 climbed into the evening sky, leaving Sofia behind. It was supposed to be a routine journey, a short hop to Varna. But just minutes after takeoff, the nightmare began. 4 men suddenly stood up, their eyes filled with desperation. Knives flashed under the dim cabin lights. Passengers gasped. A chilling announcement followed. "This plane is ours now." Fear spread like wildfire. The hijackers claimed they were ruthless criminals, ready to kill. If anyone tried to stop them, they would depressurize the plane. The demand was simple: divert to Vienna or suffer the consequences. But what the hijackers didn't know was that authorities had already set a trap. The lights of Varna were cut. A daring deception was in motion. And deep within the belly of the plane, a team of elite commandos prepared to strike. What happened next would become one of the most shocking and daring hijack rescues in aviation history. The evening seemed ordinary as Balkan-Bulgarian Airlines Flight 0113 departed from Sofia, bound for the popular Black Sea resort town of Varna. This was one of the most in-demand domestic routes at the time, carrying tourists to the northern coast's most sought-after destinations. The weather was clear and everything appeared routine. At the controls was Plamen Starlev, a pilot with 3 years of experience at the airline. It was a straightforward flight, one he had completed many times before. Assisting him was Czech captain Ilya Laranov, who was overseeing Starlev's training. This was one of Starlev's final flights before earning the title of captain. As the aircraft maintained its altitude, the crew settled into what should have been an uneventful journey. Among the passengers were Valentin Ivanov and Laksar Ivanov, traveling to Varna like many others on board. Flight attendant Valia Yordanova moved through the cabin, ensuring everything was in order. Suddenly, a commotion erupted. A group of passengers called out for her assistance. Someone was sick, they claimed. Rushing to help, she found herself pushed aside. Then, in a flash, a knife was drawn. In mere seconds, the atmosphere on board shifted from calm to chaos. 2 men had taken hostages, using them as human shields. Their demand was clear: fly to Vienna or people will die. The situation was escalating rapidly. Valia attempted to keep them calm, promising that the pilots would comply if no one was harmed. But the hijackers were relentless. One of them prowled the aisle, brandishing his knife and threatening passengers. "We just got out of prison," one of them declared. "We have nothing to lose. If necessary, we will break the windows and crash this plane." While terror gripped the cabin, the pilots remained unaware of the crisis unfolding behind them. The flight had been smooth. 15 minutes after takeoff, all systems were functioning normally. But now the hijackers needed to communicate with the cockpit. The only way was through the intercom located at the front of the plane. However, they refused to let Valia reach it. Fear paralyzed the passengers. No one dared to pick up the phone and alert the pilots. Someone had to act. But who? Meanwhile, in the cockpit, a knock at the door caught the crew's attention. Cautiously, they checked through the peephole. A man in a military uniform stood outside. Trusting the uniform, they decided to let him in. The news he delivered was almost unbelievable. There were 4 hijackers on board, armed with knives, holding hostages, and demanding to be flown to Vienna. At first, the pilots thought it was a joke, but the reality was quickly sinking in. The demands were clear, but there was a major problem. There wasn't enough fuel to reach Vienna. The aircraft was only carrying enough fuel for the short 1-hour flight to Varna, plus a small reserve for an alternate landing. Vienna was more than 550 miles away, a journey of over 2 hours. Diverting there was impossible. Realizing the gravity of the situation, the crew knew they had to act carefully. Any misstep could put everyone's lives at risk. "Tell them we'll do what they ask," they instructed, hoping to buy time while they searched for a way out of the crisis. Outside the aircraft, the world remained unaware of the unfolding nightmare. But inside, every second mattered. The balance between survival and disaster was razor thin, and the fate of everyone on board rested in the hands of those facing the most terrifying ordeal of their lives. The tension in the cockpit was palpable. The pilots had faced difficult situations before, but this was unlike anything they had ever encountered. As they tried to remain composed, they thought back to the world's most notorious hijackings, an unsettling reminder of how volatile these moments could be. One of the pilots considered a strategy. If the hijackers' main goal was simply to get from point A to point B, perhaps they could use that to their advantage. If their primary objective is to go from A to B, then maybe we are at an advantage in getting them to B and then dealing with it there, he reasoned. The crew quickly divided responsibilities. Why don't I deal with the hijackers and you take over the controls, one suggested. The key to handling the situation was self-control. A pilot's job required staying calm and professional, as any display of fear or defiance could escalate the hijackers' aggression. Maintaining composure could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Taking a deep breath, one of the pilots, Plamen Stalyov, stepped forward. "Hello, my name is Plamen Stalyov, one of the pilots in the cockpit," he announced over the intercom. His voice was steady, deliberate. "I urge the hijackers to remain calm and not to harm anyone. We have been informed of your demands, and we will do what you ask." A tense silence followed. Then came the response, "You see, we're going to Vienna." Stalyov knew he had to assure them. "It is very important for me to try to assure them that they will achieve their aim and that they will land at Vienna airport," he later reflected. But the reality was grim. Vienna was too far. He turned to his co-pilot. "What about Istanbul? Can we make it?" The stakes were unbearable. If they refused to comply with the hijackers' demand to fly to Vienna, innocent passengers could die. But if they agreed, they would likely run out of fuel before reaching the destination. The pilots needed an alternative. "We can do it," they resolved. Taking a calculated risk, Stalyov addressed the hijackers again. "Let's see if they'll accept the alternative." Outside the aircraft, the hijacked Balkan Bulgarian Airlines flight was already halfway to Varna on Bulgaria's east coast. Time was running out. Then, a chilling threat shattered any remaining illusion of control. "If you do not fly to Vienna, you will all die," one hijacker declared. He then turned his glare toward a passenger. You will die first." Realizing that negotiations were the only way to prevent a massacre, Stalyov had no choice but to act as a hostage negotiator. Steeling himself, he stepped into the passenger cabin. The sight that greeted him sent a cold shock through his body. A man stood with a knife. His presence alone was enough to unnerve anyone. But the intent in his eyes made it clear. This was no idle threat. One wrong move could mean disaster. Summoning his courage, Stalyov spoke carefully. "You know this plane is not capable of flying all the way to Vienna unless a few things happen," he reasoned. "Stay calm. We want to help you." The hijackers' response was immediate and unyielding. "No, not Istanbul, Vienna." Stalyov tried again. "Then we will need to make a stop to get more fuel." "No," the hijacker barked. "You have enough fuel. Fly to Vienna. No stops." Despite their best efforts, the hijackers refused to listen. They had no interest in negotiation. "I understand," Stalyov finally conceded. "Vienna. We will fly to Vienna." His voice was firm, though inside his mind raced. They didn't have enough fuel. They needed another solution before it was too late. He turned back to the passengers, forcing a reassuring tone. "There's no reason to be afraid. We'll do what these men want and fly to Vienna." Then, in a show of compliance, he added, "I will begin preparing for the flight now." One thing was clear, the person communicating with the hijackers needed to keep emotions in check. Every word, every action had to be measured. The calmer they remained, the calmer the hijackers might be. But there was something more at play. These hijackers were desperate men. They weren't just after a ransom or political demands. They wanted to escape. It was 1983, and much of Eastern Europe was under the influence of the Soviet Union. Communist rule had left little hope for those trapped under its control. Across the Soviet bloc, people were fleeing westward in search of freedom. The hijackers on Flight 113 were part of this exodus, willing to risk everything for a chance at a new life. Yet their desperation made them unpredictable. They said no. They want to fly straight to Vienna, the flight crew reported. Stalyov had managed to keep them from harming anyone, for now. But he was running out of options. The crew knew they were in a dire situation and needed outside help. Balkans 0113, emergency, emergency. They radioed to air traffic control. "We have been hijacked and request immediate assistance." The response was swift. Balkan 113 understood. Inside the cabin, however, the danger was only escalating. "You don't need a knife," a passenger pleaded. "I can't go anywhere." But the hijacker was unmoved. "Be quiet." The situation took a brutal turn. "If you are not quiet, I will cut off your finger," he threatened. "Is that what you want?" The passenger tried to suppress the growing panic. Screaming or resisting would only make things worse. Meanwhile, in Sofia, authorities scrambled to respond. A command center was established to manage the crisis. A rapid reaction team from the Ministry of the Interior was deployed. The race against time had begun. The tension in the cockpit was palpable. Authorities across Bulgaria, including the police and military, were on high alert, yet the hijackers remained unwavering. They refused any form of negotiation and insisted on flying directly to Vienna. As the plane neared Varna, a critical realization dawned on the flight crew. There simply wasn't enough fuel to make it to Vienna. Standoff had already rejected an alternative landing in Istanbul, but now, with fuel running low and no clear solution, Bulgarian officials found themselves in a precarious position. They weighed their options carefully. Should they attempt to appease the hijackers to keep them calm, or should they risk a dangerous military intervention? Air traffic control radioed in. "Balkan 0113, please confirm your position and fuel on board." The reply came swiftly. "Balkan 01 is currently approaching Gulf Romeo November. We have 13 kilos of fuel on board." The situation was growing dire. "Are you able to divert to Vienna?" Negative. The hijackers were armed with knives, and now they had taken a hostage. Their agitation was escalating, and their threats were growing more violent. One of them menacingly declared, "If we don't turn soon, people will die." Bulgarian authorities had to act decisively. Allowing the plane to leave Bulgarian airspace was not an option. A firm command was issued to the flight crew. "Balkan 0113, you are not to divert. Repeat, do not divert. Continue to Varna and await further instructions." Yet the biggest challenge remained, keeping the hijackers unaware of the plan. If they realized they were still heading east instead of west, their reaction could be catastrophic. Standoff understood the stakes and made a strategic decision. "We should turn," as if going to Vienna. With careful precision, the pilots executed a series of turns, creating the illusion that the plane was changing course. From the hijackers' perspective, it seemed as if their demand was being met. Inside the cabin, however, doubt lingered. One of the hijackers voiced his suspicion. "Are they tricking us?" Another scoffed at the idea, but a third, more skeptical, leaned in. "I think they would." The atmosphere thickened with paranoia. One of them snapped, his voice laced with fury. "If anyone lies, I will strangle a passenger." The stakes had never been higher. The passengers and crew remained frozen in fear as the plane continued its covert approach to Varna. With only kilometers left until landing, the pilots had to maintain the ruse. Every word, every movement was critical. "We'll be fine," Standoff reassured. "You don't have to worry." But the hijackers were on edge. One of them barked at him. "What are you doing? Go back to the cockpit and fly the plane." Standoff stood his ground. "You don't have to shout. You're scaring people. There are families here. They're frightened. We are doing what you asked." Yet the hijackers were unpredictable. As the plane closed in on Varna, the question remained, had the deception worked, or was the worst yet to come? The atmosphere inside the cabin remained tense. The passengers were visibly shaken, their fear evident in every nervous glance and hushed whisper. In an attempt to maintain some semblance of control, an appeal was made to the hijackers to stay calm. The journey to Vienna was estimated to take an hour. Perhaps they could sit down and wait. But the response was chilling. One of the hijackers, unwavering in his threat, declared, "I expect to see Vienna in an hour. If I don't, I will blow up the plane." His words sent a wave of panic through the aircraft. He insisted they had enough explosives to obliterate the plane, reinforcing the gravity of the situation. The revelation that they possessed liquid explosives heightened the danger. If they were to detonate the device mid-air, the consequences would be catastrophic. The mere thought of an explosion while the plane was aloft struck fear into everyone on board. Any sudden introduction of a weapon or explosive device only exacerbated the uncertainty, intensifying the urgency of the crisis. Meanwhile, on the ground, officials were racing against time. The aircraft was only 15 minutes away from its supposed destination, but the situation called for a drastic measure. The hijackers had to believe they were landing in Vienna, not in Varna. the coastal city in Bulgaria, where the authorities had decided to bring the plane down. A deception had to be executed flawlessly. A plan was quickly devised. The plane would be directed to fly north of Varna and circle over the Black Sea. This maneuver would buy valuable time and create the illusion of a longer flight to Vienna. The decision was made. Flight 0113 would bypass Vienna's airspace and instead maintain a holding pattern over the sea. The pilots received their instructions. Balkan 0113, fly heading 08U north of Varna. Maintain the hold pattern over the sea. The objective was clear: prolong the flight, mislead the hijackers, and allow ground forces to prepare for the impending landing. However, they had to be cautious. No steep turns, any unnatural movement could arouse suspicion. Fuel became a growing concern. The aircraft could only remain in the air for a limited time before being forced to land. As they circled over the Black Sea, the crew kept a close watch on the fuel reserves. Every additional minute spent airborne was precious, affording the ground teams time to prepare for a controlled landing. Inside the cabin, an attempt was made to engage the hijackers in conversation, a strategic distraction. "Why did you choose Vienna?" the question was posed. The response was immediate and sharp: "Be quiet." Undeterred, the questioning continued. "Do you have plans when you get there?" "This is not your business," one of the hijackers snapped. The tension was palpable. Another warning followed: "Stop asking questions." But the true intent behind the inquiries was not curiosity. It was a calculated effort to divert their attention from what was unfolding outside. The deception had to hold. Then came a crucial moment. As the aircraft continued its flight, one of the hijackers peered out of the window, eyeing the coastline below. Skepticism crept into his voice. "Who would believe that's Vienna?" The realization dawned. When they landed near the Black Sea, the hijackers would immediately recognize that they had been misled. Vienna was not by the sea. It was situated along a river. Varna, on the other hand, was a well-known coastal city. The risk was undeniable. If the hijackers identified the city, they might retaliate, endangering the passengers. A bold and unconventional solution emerged. "Turn off the lights at the airport," one official suggested. But that wouldn't be enough. "No, the whole city," another voice insisted. The logic was simple but audacious. If the hijackers couldn't see the coastline, they might be convinced they were in Vienna. However, cutting power to an entire city, one of Bulgaria's largest, with a population of 200,000 to 300,000, was no easy feat. Yet in a communist country, such an action might be possible. "Can we cut the power here?" An urgent question was posed. But the challenge remained: how to execute the blackout without plunging the airport into darkness. Every aspect of the deception required meticulous coordination. Each additional measure taken increased the risk of exposure. If the hijackers discovered the truth before landing, the consequences could be dire. With time running out, the decision was made. Power to most of Varna and its surrounding areas would be cut, but the airport lights would remain on. The fate of everyone on board hinged on whether the hijackers would fall for the illusion. The aircraft had been circling for nearly an hour. Fuel levels were dropping dangerously low. "We're down to 550 kilos, came the report. "We can't stay out here much longer." Flight 0113 had no choice. It had to land in Varna within the next 30 minutes. Whether the city lights were off or not, the moment of truth was fast approaching. A final transmission crackled over the radio. "Balkan 0113, what needs to be done will be done." The plan was in motion. Now all that remained was to see if the deception would hold. The radio transmissions crackled through the cockpit as Flight 0113 prepared for its final descent. Every detail mattered now: altitude, heading, and coordination with the ground. The pilots relayed their data, confirming their approach to what they had to convince the hijackers was Vienna. Meanwhile, on the ground, the tension was palpable. Emergency teams had already been mobilized. Firefighters and ambulances stood ready, their presence essential in case the worst happened. There was a real fear that the aircraft carried flammable liquid. One wrong move could turn the landing into a catastrophe. At the same time, the city-wide blackout had to be executed flawlessly. Cutting power to a population of nearly 300,000 wasn't as simple as flipping a switch. Key institutions, hospitals, jails, and government buildings had to be warned in advance to ensure their operations wouldn't be disrupted. But time was running out. The longer this took, the higher the risk that the hijackers would realize the deception and retaliate against the passengers. Then, confirmation came. They are ready to cut power. Just after 7:30 p.m., the switch was flipped. In an instant, Varna disappeared into darkness. Even boats along the shore were ordered to extinguish their lights. The only remaining illumination came from the airport's runway, guiding the plane toward its carefully staged illusion. With the blackout confirmed, air traffic control relayed the final instructions. Balkan 0113, you may begin your approach to Varna. Runway will be 27 on heading 035. Descent at your discretion. Only the runway lights will be active. The rest of the city will be dark. Inside the cockpit, a sense of cautious optimism took hold. Look at that, one of the officials murmured. They did it. Seeing the city plunged into darkness was a critical moment. It meant the plan had a real chance of succeeding. As Flight 0113 approached, its pilots carried out their final checks. Neon lights flickered on, boost pumps activated. They were just minutes away from touchdown, but no one on board knew what would happen once they reached the ground. From 10 miles out, the aircraft began its final descent. I'll prepare the cabin for landing, the crew announced, maintaining the facade. The hijackers, still believing they were bound for Vienna, were told, as you can see, we've begun our descent towards Vienna. We'll be on the ground in just a few minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts. But then, a sliver of doubt crept in. Vienna? One of the hijackers muttered. He peered through the window. I don't see Vienna. The tension in the cockpit spiked. I don't see Vienna, he repeated, his voice growing sharper. I see water. Why do I see water? This is not Vienna. A moment of panic. That is the Danube, the crew responded quickly. We are almost in Vienna. Would he believe it? There was no time to dwell on the answer. The pilots pressed on, but another issue surfaced. Landing gear, not locked. Only 2 green, one reported. A problem, just 5 miles from touchdown. A missing indication meant the nose gear might not be fully deployed. Normally, the solution would be simple, a low pass over the tower so ground control could visually confirm the landing gear. But that option was out of the question. A low pass would allow the hijackers to see Varna clearly and realize they had been deceived. With only 200 kilos of fuel left, the decision was made. There was no time for hesitation. The pilots ran a final check and determined that the issue was likely a burned-out bulb rather than a mechanical failure. Confident that the gear was down, they committed to the landing. Balkan 0113, we are ready to land, runway 27. The final moments approached. They will be on the ground in 4 minutes. The last descent began. Let's get down to 500 for precision approach. On the ground, officials coordinated their next move. We'll get them to pull off the runway and stop here on taxiway 4, came the command. And that would be the moment. That was where the operation would begin. The plan to storm the plane was set. As soon as the aircraft touched down, the next phase would unfold. This was now a mission for the state security forces. The fate of everyone on board would be decided in the next few minutes. The hijackers had no way out. Surrender was never an option for them. They would either be captured or killed. As Flight 0113 descended, the tension inside the cabin was unbearable. The plane was fully stabilized for landing, gliding toward the runway in Varna, Bulgaria. Yet the hijackers remained convinced they were approaching Vienna. We're almost there, one of them murmured. A quiet exchange took place between 2 passengers. When we land in Vienna, you should come with us, one whispered urgently. I can't, came the reply, voice laced with emotion. My family is waiting for me. Despite the chaos, the crew remained composed, focusing on their duties. The aircraft touched down. 50 feet, 40, 30. The numbers ticked down until the wheels kissed the tarmac. The flight had landed safely, but the danger was far from over. The control tower's voice crackled over the radio. Please proceed slowly to taxiway no. 4 and stand by for instructions. The pilot acknowledged, steering the aircraft as directed. It'll be a right turn onto taxiway 4. Keep it slow. Engines powered down, and an eerie silence settled over the plane. The hijackers, still unaware of their true location, demanded proof. I want to see a sign that says Vienna. "You can't see it from here," the crew replied, stalling for time. The demands escalated. "Bring Austrian customs agents on board." "We can arrange that." In reality, there were no Austrian agents. The authorities scrambled to find 2 airport workers who could pose as border police. Their task? Scout the aircraft and report back before the real assault began. But the hijackers weren't fooled for long. "They're not Austrian," one suddenly realized, eyes narrowing. "Look at his jacket. It's Bulgarian." The mood shifted in an instant. Betrayal, fury. They tricked us. They lied to us. Then, the command that sent ice through every passenger's veins. "Kill her. Kill her now." A flight attendant was yanked from her seat, dragged toward the restroom. She pleaded, sobbing, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Please, please don't hurt me." In that moment, as she stood inches from death, time seemed to freeze. The mission had backfired. The hijackers now knew they weren't in Vienna. The lives of everyone on board were hanging by a thread. From the outside, Bulgarian security forces could hear the escalating chaos. The moment of hesitation was over. The order was given. "Start the operation, now!" Within seconds, armed officers stormed the aircraft. Gunfire erupted, screams. The hijackers were taken by surprise, but they fought back viciously. "There's another one in there. He's got the flight attendant," someone yelled. Inside the cramped restroom, the hijacker held his trembling hostage as a shield. The officers mere seconds to react. "Let her go," they commanded. He didn't. A single shot rang out. The hijacker fell. The bullet had struck its mark, barely missing the flight attendant by mere millimeters. She gasped for air, shaken but alive. In the aftermath, as bodies were removed and weapons secured, the grim reality of the moment settled in. Success was never guaranteed. A single miscalculation could have cost innocent lives. But after 2 hours of terror, it was finally over. The passengers were safe, the crew had survived, and the nightmare that began in the sky had ended on the ground. The crisis had ended, but its impact would linger for years to come. The aircraft was saved, the passengers were safe, and Flight 0113 would go down in history. Not as a tragedy, but as a testament to teamwork, quick thinking, and resilience. While the ordeal was over for the crew and passengers, the 3 surviving hijackers now faced the full weight of the law. Bulgarian authorities wasted no time in investigating their backgrounds, determined to understand who these men were and why they had resorted to such drastic measures. What they uncovered painted a picture of desperation rather than extremism. Each of the hijackers had minor criminal records, petty thefts, small infractions. They were young men with troubled pasts, but nothing in their history suggested they were capable of attempting an aircraft hijacking. 2 of them had previously served in the military, with one still on active duty at the time of the hijacking. Yet, despite their training, their plan was reckless and hastily conceived. They hadn't meticulously plotted their actions for months. They hadn't devised a sophisticated escape plan. Instead, they had smuggled knives onto the plane just hours before departure, hiding the blades behind their belt buckles to evade security. At the time, screening procedures for domestic flights were significantly more lenient than those for international travel, a loophole that allowed them to board the aircraft armed. To avoid drawing attention, they passed through security at 50-minute intervals, blending into the flow of passengers. It was a simple yet effective maneuver, one that should have never been possible. In hindsight, it became clear that their ability to bypass security was less a mark of their cunning and more an indictment of the system's vulnerabilities. But even if they had succeeded in reaching their intended destination, their plan was deeply flawed. They had convinced themselves that if they could make it to Vienna, they would be granted political asylum. They imagined a future where Austrian authorities would welcome them, offering protection and a new life. They never considered the far more likely outcome, immediate arrest. The reality hit them too late. Instead of freedom, they were met with swift justice. After a short trial, the 3 surviving hijackers were sentenced to prison terms ranging from 7 to 10 years. Loxer Ivanov, the most aggressive among them, received the harshest punishment, a full decade behind bars. Looking back, the most striking aspect of the entire operation was how authorities approached the crisis. There was no prolonged negotiation, no attempt at a peaceful resolution. Instead, the priority had been singular: regain control at any cost. Deception had been the weapon of choice. Trick the hijackers, isolate them, and neutralize the threat. It was a gamble, but it worked. In the aftermath, Bulgaria tightened its airport security, particularly for domestic flights. The hijacking of Bulgarian Airlines Flight 0113 would go down in history as the last of its kind in the country. For the crew, the experience left an indelible mark, but it did not deter them from their passion for aviation. Captain Plamen Stalshev continued flying, serving with Bulgarian Airlines for another 8 years before moving on to other carriers. Even 40 years later, he remained in the cockpit, a veteran pilot whose legacy was forever linked to that fateful flight. Reflecting on the ordeal, he credited the success of the mission to one key factor: teamwork. The flight crew, the ground staff, the military, and the police had operated as a single unit. That unity had been the difference between disaster and triumph. Flight attendant Valentina Yordanova, who had been at the mercy of the hijackers in the final moments, recovered fully from the traumatic event. Just weeks later, she returned to work, resuming her role as if nothing had happened. She would go on to serve as a flight attendant for another 17 years. When asked why she continued flying after such a harrowing experience, her response was simple yet profound. Flying is something very special. It is in my heart. It is in my blood. And so, she flew. And so, with one hijacker dead, 3 in custody, and every passenger and crew member rescued, this terrifying ordeal came to an end. What started as a desperate bid for escape turned into a dramatic standoff, ending in a swift and decisive rescue operation. The bravery of the flight crew, the passengers who remained calm under pressure, and the elite commandos who stormed the aircraft all played a part in ensuring that this story didn't end in tragedy. Incidents like this remind us just how unpredictable air travel can be, and how quick thinking and courage can make the difference between life and death. Thank you for watching and for taking this journey with us. If you found this story fascinating, let us know your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in this situation? And as always, if there were any details we may have missed, feel free to share your insights. We appreciate your support, and we'll see you in the next video. Stay safe and take care.